Hi everyone, thanks for coming back. I hope everyone had a chance to make the chocolate chip cookies from last week. Today we're going to be making a chocolate cake. This is the first chocolate cake recipe I remember making from scratch. I discovered the recipe back in college from an old Good Housekeeping book. I still have the book, which I dug out of my attic, and it was fun because it actually just opens right up to the page because it's very well worn and very loved. So I haven't made this recipe in years, but I'm super excited to try it again because I remember loving it. It's a one bowl cake, which means there is no mess at the end. It's really just the one bowl that you use to mix everything together. In fact, before I was gonna pre-measure all my ingredients so you guys didn't have to watch me measure, and I realized I'd have a lot of little bowls at the end, so I figured you guys can watch me measure on camera. So a few things that we want to remember before we get started mixing everything together. You want to make sure that your ingredients are at room temperature. So today we need eggs, butter, and milk at room temperature. So again, if you have a microwave, go ahead and zap the butter and the milk in just a few minutes. The butter is going to be a little bit softer than room temperature. I don't know if you can tell, but it's soft because you want that to incorporate into the batter. And then the milk, you just basically want the cool off. So just a few seconds for the butter and a few, maybe 30, 45 seconds for the milk. The eggs just stick into a bowl of hot water and they'll come to room temperature in about 10 minutes. So that's easy with those. The oven, and then the last thing, now this is a tip. This is one of these things that this goes beyond this cake, is you want to make sure that you grease your pans. Now, when I say grease your pans, generously grease them. You can use Crisco. I use cooking spray. I find it's just easier and less mess. I'm all about less mess. And with the cooking spray, I highly, highly recommend using parchment paper. Now, I have parchment paper on here now. I'm not sure if you can tell, but I just cut a circle out of a regular sheet of parchment paper and I just stick it into the bottom of the pan and then spray that with cooking spray as well. This will save you many, many hours of frustration if you bake in the future. So I highly recommend doing that. If you don't have parchment paper, not the end of the world. You can either sprinkle some flour and just tap that around the pan. You can even use cocoa powder today because we're using a chocolate cake, so that way it just blends nicely. But if you are going to bake a lot in the future, if you want to really get into baking cakes, I would highly recommend investing in a roll of parchment paper. That's about $4 or $5, but it's worth every penny if you're going to bake cakes. So that is my suggestion and my tip to take with you. So we're gonna get started. Like I said, we're just gonna dump everything into the bowl, and at the end we'll have a beautiful cake to enjoy, and you can eat it all weekend long. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so we're gonna get started. Like I said, we're gonna just dump it all in one bowl. One of the things that I like to use is a sifter for my flour. If you don't have one, no big deal, but if you do have a strainer, you can also use that, but you don't need to. It's just something that I use. So we're gonna put in 2 cups of flour. Something that you want to try to do, and I will be honest, I don't really do very often, is you don't want to scoop your ingredients into the cup and use it. You're supposed to use a spoon and scoop it in this way, especially with cakes, because you don't want it to be too dense. You want to make sure that you're not packing more flour in there than you need, okay? So that's 1 cup of flour, and we'll do the same thing. 2 cups of flour. Okay. 2 cups of flour. You can sift it in there. You can also just put all the ingredients in and sift it. And it's a little bit easier to go one ingredient at a time. It's easier to get through the bowl. Okay, then you're gonna do 1 cup of sugar. I haven't made this recipe in a long time, so I don't know this recipe right off the top of my head. So if you see me referring to the cookbook. That's why. All right, so you're gonna do a cup of sugar. That out, that in. And you're gonna do 3/4 cups of brown sugar. What I find interesting is I don't really use brown sugar very much in my cake recipes, so, but I remember loving this recipe. And if it doesn't go through the sifter, don't use it. Just throw it in, okay? So you're not going to use the sifter for the brown sugar. It's 3/4 cups. Remember, you can pack that in pretty good, okay? And then you're going to use 2/3 cups of cocoa. I find cocoa gets everywhere, so just be careful when you use it. Like goes flying. And cocoa is another thing I like to use the sifter for. A lot of times, especially if you don't use it very often, you can get little clumps in there. And I just use regular Hershey's unsweetened for this particular recipe. What I like about it is that they're easy ingredients to either find, usually, or sometimes you just have them in your pantry. Okay, so that's 2/3 cups of cocoa. So you sift that through. And these little clumps, that's normal. You can just sort of, it goes through. Okay. And then you're going to use a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. Okay. Dump that in there. Oh, you know, actually it's 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Always make sure you read your recipe carefully. All right, so 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And then 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Just using regular table salt. You can use kosher salt if you want, whatever you have on hand. Sometimes it's weird to think that you're putting salt in your sweet things, but the salt actually helps bring the sweetness out and doesn't make the sweetness so overwhelming. So that's why you do that. So I'm gonna just mix this a little bit together to combine all of the ingredients. Okay, because then we're gonna start putting the wet ingredients in. And I like to combine it like this so it doesn't get chunks of flour or baking soda when the wet ingredients hit it. Okay. Doesn't have to be perfect, just a little mixed together. Okay. So now we're gonna use 1.5 cups of milk, which I actually have measured out already. So I'm just gonna stick that in there. You're gonna use a 1/2 cup of butter. I'm just gonna stick that in there. I'm just gonna break it up into pieces so you can see it. Okay. And then you're gonna do 2 eggs. And Remember the tip from last week, crack them into one bowl and then put them in the actual mix because you don't want your eggshells to end up in your cake batter. So put them in. And then you're going to do 2 teaspoons, I don't know if I have 2 teaspoons left in this, 2 teaspoons of vanilla. I go through vanilla in this house like crazy. So you're going to mix that all together, and then you're going to put it on your mixer. Okay. Again, with your paddle attachment, if you have it. If you don't have a paddle attachment, you don't have a stand mixer, you have a hand mixer, just mix it together. If you have a just a bowl and a spoon, that's fine too. I would just suggest, if you're going to do it that way, to make sure that you beat your eggs before you put them in. But other than that, you're just going to put this in here and let it combine. You're going to mix it just until it's combined, okay? Not too much longer than that. And you want to make sure that, like, once it's kind of wet, you can stop it, and then you can mix, you can scrape down the bowl. Okay, make sure you get all the stuff that's at the bottom of the bowl up. And you're going to mix again. You probably mix for 2 minutes. Okay, so we'll do that. Before we put our cake batter in the pan, one of the things I want to show you is this little purple strip. So this is called a baking strip. This is to help your cake pans insulate the heat, and so your cake will rise evenly. So oftentimes when you bake cakes, they will dome, and so they dome just because the way the heat is distributed in the pan. So these little things, I don't exactly know the technology behind it, but these little things help the pan conduct the heat more evenly so the cake rises evenly. So if you don't have them at home, which is expected, you can make them. Now, I hesitate to say how you can make them right now, just given the state of the grocery stores, but you can make them by using paper towels and tin foil. So I am not going to show you right now because I have very few paper towels left in my house, but if you have plenty, you can take a good stretch of paper towels, because you want it to wrap around your cake pan. You want to put those paper towels into tin foil of the same size. You will wet the paper towels, and then you will fold the tin foil over the paper towel to kind of look like this. And then you'll wrap that around the pan, and it will do the same thing. I'll just conduct the heat on the pan. Okay, so you can use those if you want to. If you have plenty of paper towels at home, you can do that. And if not, you can just bake them normally, which is I've done for years. And then if you want, you can level them off at the end, and so you won't have that dome of cake over it. So that way, when you easily ice it, it's not a dome. So that's how I would suggest doing that. These, if you have them at home, you want to make sure that they're wet, not saturated to the point of dripping, but wet enough that they'll keep the heat in there. Okay. Okay. All right. So now the cake mix is all combined. So we're gonna take that out. So if you look at it, it's kind of almost fudgy looking. Okay. So you want to make sure it looks like that. All right. When you mix it together, when you go into the bottom, you shouldn't see any white flour or baking soda. If you do, you want to make sure you mix a little bit more. Those will not bake out. So let's say you have a big clump of flour in your mix and you baked it. When you cut into that cake, you will see that big clump of flour. So you want to make sure you don't do that, okay? So what we'll do is we will divide them up between the two pans. If you have a kitchen scale at home, I live and breathe by my kitchen scale, but if you have a kitchen scale at home, you can measure out how much how much mix goes in each pan. I'm not going to do that now because most people don't have kitchen scales at home, so we'll just leave it at this. So we'll save the paddle for my daughter, and we'll just divide these up between the two. And you want to basically keep them, what that is. You want to keep them about halfway full. Now these pans are 3-inch deep pans, so they're pretty deep, okay? A standard size pan is usually a 2-inch pan. So if my pans look big, that's why. And the ones you have at home are perfectly fine. Okay? So you want to make sure you get everything out. Okay? If you like to lick the batter off the spoon, there'll be plenty of batter afterwards. Okay? So you want to even it out. And this makes a difference because how you put it in the pan is how it will bake up. Okay? So I can tell this one's a little bit more than this one. So I'm gonna steal some from there. Okay. So you even that out. And then we're gonna stick it in the oven for 30 minutes. When it's done, you're gonna be able to stick a toothpick into the center. It should come out clean. Now, if there's a crumb or two in there, that's fine. But if the batter is wet, if you're gonna see a big streak of cake batter, that is not done. So put it in for a few more minutes. But a little goes a long way when you're baking cakes. So don't be like, oh, it's not done, and put it in for another 10 minutes. You will have a burnt cake. So I usually, when that happens, I usually do like 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, and then test it again. So don't wait too long in between. So you stick that in there 30 minutes, and we'll see what it looks like when it comes out. Okay, so we are all set. These two cakes just came out, and just so you know, I set the timer for 30 minutes, and when I went to check them, it was too wet. So I put them in for another 4 minutes and stuck the toothpick in, and this is what it came out like. So you can see that there's crumbs on it, but it's not wet, so you can tell it's cooked through. So what you need to do now is you need to leave them alone, let them sit in the pan. I like to let them sit in the pan for about 15-20 minutes, and then you'll turn them over and you'll let them cool in the cooling rack, okay? You need to let your cakes cool completely before you ice them, okay? It's super, super important. That goes for cupcakes, cakes, anything. If you go and try to ice them when they're even a little bit warm, the icing will just melt off, okay? So I'm gonna let these cool, and then I'll come back and I'll ice the cake with you guys. I'm just gonna use icing that I have left over from my cake from the other day. You can use whatever icing you want. If you wanna go online and look for a recipe, you certainly can. Pinterest is always a good place to start. But we'll let these cool for a little while. It probably will take to cool them completely at least an hour. If you're in a rush and you really wanna make the cake quickly, you can always stick them in the freezer and they'll cool obviously a little bit faster. So we'll come back once these are all cooled off. Okay, so the cakes are out of the pan and they're nice and cool. I put mine in the freezer for a few minutes because my daughter's anxiously waiting for me to be done with this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna ice it. Like I said, you could use any icing that you have at home. You could make your own, you could buy your own, whatever you wanna do. I have this left over from a cake from the other day. So what I do is I put on a hefty amount for the middle layer. Right? We're just gonna do this really quick, okay? Let's spread that out. Keeps it all stable. My kids are playing Zingo in the background. If you hear them, they want me to play with them, so we are gonna move through this quickly. Okay? It's so funny, I bake a lot of cakes and I decorate a lot of them, but I don't make them often for my family. So it's nice just to kind of ice it quickly and be able to dig into the cake because I so rarely get to eat them anymore. So. All right, so you want to try to make it as even as possible in here because this does matter at the end because the you want it to be all level, you want it to be all flat. Okay, so you're gonna take this, put it right on top. You want to have the side that was on the bottom of the pan facing up because that's the flattest edge. So if you can see, it's all nice and flat. Kind of stick it down And if you guys want me to do a more in-depth decorating video, let me know. And we can go from there. So this is the easy part. You just kind of smooth this out. When I'm doing a cake, normally I would do something called a crumb coat, and you just put a thin layer of icing on, and you stick that in the refrigerator, and everything is just a little bit easier to kind of smooth on. But like I said, my kids are waiting for me to go play video games or board games. Okay, so I did a quick icing job on this cake, and again, it's just a quick buttercream. I wasn't doing any bells and whistles, but I am going to sprinkle some powdered sugar on it just to make it a little bit prettier. And then you can do this, you cannot do this, it's up to you. But sometimes you can make something really simple look a little bit fancier just with a little bit of powdered sugar on it. So we are going to, I'm going to sprinkle some on the side of the plate. Okay, so that's it. Okay, this is the chocolate cake, one bowl. I hope you enjoy it. Try it out. Let me know what you think. Again, I'm on Instagram and on Facebook under Rolling Out Memories. I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks so much. Enjoy your cake.